To be fair, same-sex marriage isn't the only threat to our children who need both a mother and a father. Unfortunately, they're growing up in a culture that's become complacent and selfish when it comes to the tragedy of divorce.
People get divorced because they really want a sense of freedom. They really want to avoid pain. Mom and dad, in their anger, in their frustration, in their hurt, they move into areas of emotional, verbal, physical abuse. So what we do is we frequently say, well, this is too damaging for children, we better get divorced.
I think early on when we started fighting, my son, he was probably too young. He's a newborn to 1 year old, so I don't think he could relate. But now as he's gotten older, he's now 4, I think he knows. And it started to affect him. You know, you can see it.
And he'd get scared and he'd say, Mommy, Daddy, stop fighting, stop fighting. And I'm like, what are we doing? What are we doing to our child? I don't want him to think this is the norm. You know, we're both on staff, paid by a church, at a Bible college. I mean, we shouldn't be having these problems. You know, what's wrong with us?
Yeah, divorce sucks. Yeah, divorce, my son will have to deal with a lot of stuff, but it's got to be better than this.
The scholars that have looked at the fallout from divorce, what they have seen in children of divorce, the lightning strike that came into those children's lives was not the disunity between the parents or the fighting that the parents were caught up in. It was the presentation of the divorce, the announcement that your father and I, your mother and I are divorcing. It was at that point that so many of these children stated that my childhood ended on that day.
High levels of conflict, much less violence between parents, is very damaging for children. But if parents seem to basically get along and the home is a safe place, then children prefer that their parents are together. Now, I think that if we only divorced when we could honestly say, my children would be better off if I separated, we would probably have divorce rates about a quarter of what we have now.
Most people, what I find, is they're disappointed in divorce. It just doesn't work. First of all, at a financial level, it's devastating to people. Secondly, the loneliness does catch up with us. Thirdly, what happens is we replicate the mistakes that we had in the first marriage in future relationships. And they're just as unhappy in the second marriage, the third marriage, and even the fourth marriage as they were in the first marriage.
But I contend that if a person has chosen to look at the Christian way of life, I think they stand a better chance of making it. I'll just speak for myself. I am a second marriage. I went through a terrible divorce. And I realized that I needed Christ. And when I sought Him in my single life, I knew that my second marriage would be much more successful, and it has been. We are not damaged goods. I can say that as pastor, if I had to see myself as a damaged good, I couldn't get up and speak the word. Instead, I feel completely free because I understand who Jesus Christ is.
The good data that looks at this from real sociologists of religion and family find out that the likelihood of people divorcing today generally across the population is in the low 40s. It's not in the 50%, it's in the low 40s. People who have a relatively serious faith practice, they have a lower likelihood to ever face a divorce.
There really is a point when divorce might be necessary, but that really is the exception. An unhealthy marriage can be fixed, it can be repaired. A divorce can't be.
Communication was horrible. I mean, we didn't know how to fight fair, and we had a huge financial just crisis, going through bankruptcy, having people have money too. You just feel like a failure.
I think there was parts of me that didn't want to admit it, but I was bitter and resentful at Avon for not taking care of things better, for taking too many risks, and everything that I said was somehow, felt like I was making him less of a man. It was the time where we most needed to share our feelings and most needed to connect and most needed to communicate. It just wasn't there. He didn't know how, and I didn't know how to draw it out of him. And it seemed like the harder I tried, the worse it got. And it was hard. It was very hard.
Marriage is a challenge. It's hard work, but it's not rocket science. The reality is you do certain things and your marriage is going to get better. You do other things and your marriage is going to get worse. Research supports that if you work on your marriage, you can turn it around. It shows that divorce leads to more and more problems.
The principles we say we believe in, the principles of love, patience, kindness, forgiveness, long-suffering, which means suffering for a long time, these principles are so life-changing. They're so powerful. All you need to do is get any two people in the world who live by these principles, and you can succeed.
Why is it so hard to admit that my marriage has problems? And it was just really being honest that, you know what, we have issues and we need help. This counselor just really honed in 15, 20 minutes of what really some root issues were in me. I mean, all I had to do was, he just said, basically just start talking about your marriage, and I just started talking, and it's like, you know, what do you mean? And he just started just destroying me, you know? And it was good, it's what I needed.
I'm so glad we stuck this out. Not only is this an example to our son, but this is an example to others. It is absolutely worth it to go and seek help. So what if there's a little bit of embarrassment? So what if you're brought to your knees, so to speak, and you're humbled a little bit?
Knowing that my son, 24 hours a day, looks at what I do, what I say, the decisions I make, and it makes me say, I better make the decision based on what God wants me to do and not just what makes me feel happy.
The leading secular scholars looking at this throughout the world find time and time and time again that children who grow up raised by their own mothers and fathers in a home where their mothers and fathers are married face elevated benefits in how they do well in school, how they don't have to visit the doctor or the hospital as often because of physical or psychological ailments, how they stay away from troubles with the law. As they get older, they're not as likely to get pregnant before marriage. They're more likely to graduate from high school, do well in high school, how they go on to college, become well employed, avoiding poverty, avoiding domestic violence from either, adults in their home, either physical or sexual or even verbal violence. Kids growing up with their married mothers and fathers are significantly less likely, by half and sometimes by 3/4, as likely to suffer from any of these things than kids growing up apart from their married mothers and fathers.